Hello, I'm Dr. Rob Lindsay at Vallejo Health and Wellness Center, and for the next couple of minutes I want to take some time and give some background about what we have seen, not just us, what people around the world are seeing as the underlying cause of chronic health problems, health dysfunction, and that kind of thing. But it all starts with this, that knowing that everything in the universe, everything that God created, has energy. It has an energetic frequency to it. In other words, it has a vibratory frequency, and that it can be measured. Now, the thing is that we know this because everything is made up of atoms. Okay? So the quantum physicists that are out there have told us that atoms, whether it's a carbon atom, a mercury atom, whether it's the atom of helium or hydrogen, everything has a vibratory frequency. And it's very specific. It's kind of like my thumbprint is unique to me. I've heard it said that there's no two people on the entire planet that have the exact same thumbprint. And that's the same with atoms. No two atoms have the same vibratory frequency. So with that said, what we know is that if you have atoms and you put a bunch of atoms together, what you get is a molecule. Now this molecule now has, let's say, carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. Now all of a sudden you have a water molecule. And that water molecule has a vibratory frequency to it. And if you added another carbon to it, now you've got a different molecule with a different vibratory frequency that, again, it could be measured. Now remember, when we talk about frequency, don't let it make you go, whoa, this is crazy stuff. Every time that you hear a guitar plucked, that's a frequency that you're hearing. It's just that some frequencies you can't hear, some frequencies you can't see. For example, the frequency of the radio signal that comes through your tuner in your car. Now you put enough of these compounds or these molecules together, now you have a compound of a whole bunch of molecules that, let's just say this was what made up an organ in the human body. And you put enough of these together and you have what's called resonance. Resonance is this vibratory frequency, like this picture is showing, where a typical cell has a vibratory frequency of 1,000 hertz. That means that it vibrates about 1,000 times every second. So this is not woo-woo stuff. This is scientific. Now, a medical doctor by the name of Robert Becker actually wrote a book, this is several years old, called The Body Electric, and in that book he talks about how our body is electromagnetic in nature and that different organs have different vibratory frequencies when they are functioning at their optimal or ideal levels. For example, the average body frequency of a thyroid gland is somewhere between 62 and 68 megahertz according to Dr. Becker. And you can see that these other organs have a vibratory frequency as well. In other words, those organs work best when they have a frequency, a vibration, in that normal range. So, something that's interesting to note is that your brain actually puts out about 30 watts of power, enough to power a light bulb. And everybody knows that if they stick their finger in a light socket, that the electricity is going to flow into their body because you do conduct electricity. Energy flows through our bodies. Now, if you were a kid and you ever played with magnets, or even as an adult, you know that if you put the two north poles together, they will repel each other. That's because there's a field there, what they call an electromagnetic field, within that magnet. And those magnets were only locked together when the north and the south pole, which don't repel each other, they actually attract each other, when those fields come together. So this idea of these energy fields is nothing new. It's just people haven't talked about it as much in relation to the human body. Matter of fact, the Earth itself has an electromagnetic field. We have a north and a south pole, and this is an artist rendering of what it would look like where this field, this surrounds the Earth. Now, nobody questions this as well, because this is how sailors in the old days, and even nowadays, with a compass would know where north and south were, and they would use it to help navigate. So this idea of this energetic field that's around us, around the world, around our bodies, is really not that new. And modern day research is showing this to be true, and this is an artist's rendering of what the human body's field would look like. Energetic field. Now, some of the smartest people that you've ever even heard of have talked about this, going back, well, a century. Albert Einstein said that all matter is energy fields. Okay? Nikola Tesla, a great physicist, great inventor, said if you want to find the secrets of the universe, think in terms of frequency and vibration. So again, vibratory frequency. So I want to explore this a little bit more, because what I'm going to talk about is going to help you to understand how we might, well, one, get sick, how our bodies might not work as well as they should, and then in a subsequent video talk about what do we do to find these health problems, and then how do we work to help them get better. So, by the way, if you think this isn't medical, just think about an EKG. I mean, people have EKGs all the time where they hook these leads up to the chest because they're trying to get information about how that heart is working. And that electrocardiogram, they call it, is actually just receiving signals from the heart, because the heart gives off a signal. And you can break it down to its simplest form into some kind of a frequency, and then they will give you a picture of what that heart is doing, what the electrical activity of that heart is doing. And they'll use that to help diagnose a heart problem. The same thing happens when they're using magnetic resonance imaging. Instead of using this kind of a system, though, they're using magnets, okay, to get information about tissues deep in the body that they can't see unless they were to open them up in surgery. So the idea of using energetic frequencies as diagnostic tools in medicine has been around for a long, long time. It's nothing new. Also, what about this? We all have a little key fob, right? We can leave the store, and there can be a parking lot full of hundreds of cars, and we click our button, and our car door will open or unlock. Why does that happen? Well, it's because the frequency, the communication between our key fob and our car is unique to our car. Nobody ever questions that that can't work, and yet you can't see it working. The same is true of your garage door opener. So the idea or concept of energetic frequencies going through the atmosphere, going through the air, or even through our body that can reveal things to us is really not that new. And as a matter of fact, I love to use this analogy. Now, if this is a radio station, okay, and you're listening to your favorite radio station, let's say that it's 98.5 on your radio dial. What that means is that there's a radio tower that's giving off a frequency of 98.5 megahertz. That means a million cycles every second, okay? Now, in order for you to hear it, you have to have your car tuner tuned to 98.5. And the way this basically works is that the signal that you can't see or feel is going through the air, and when your tuner is tuned to that same frequency, your antenna is going to pick up that signal. It's going to pick up that signal, and then the tuner is going to turn that signal into something that you can listen to and hear as music. Now, what do you think would happen, though, if your radio dial got turned to 99? Well, everybody knows that you would end up with static on the system. Okay, it wouldn't be clear. You might hear it garbled, or, my goodness, you might even pick up a whole different radio station. So, the same kind of principle is happening to our bodies. Just like there is an ideal setting for you to hear 98.5, and if you turn to the 99, now all of a sudden those two signals are not matched. That's called an interference, is what that's called. Okay, it's interfering. You don't hear it properly. Now, if we know, like I said earlier, that the organs of our body, which are made up of a whole bunch of cells, and all of those cells all are vibrating at their own specific frequency, as long as those cells are not being interfered with, then that organ is working well. And as a result of those energetic frequencies, guess what happens? Our body actually makes chemicals that work together and interact. That's what we call biochemistry. But what's really interesting is that the physicists have shown us that it's physics that primarily controls chemistry in our body. The chemistry we're talking about are enzymes and hormones, all the different reactions that are occurring. But nobody thinks so much about them being controlled by these energetic frequencies or these fields around those cells. Now that's pretty darn interesting if you ask me, because in our current medical model, and even in most of alternative medicine, when you have a disease or a sickness or an illness or a symptom, where do they go? They go right to a medication. They go right to chemistry, or a supplement, which is chemistry. So the question is, can you treat a vibratory frequency or a physics problem with chemistry? And will it be lasting? I would submit to you that maybe not always the case. So what can happen then in our bodies? If we have this optimal vibratory frequency of, let's say, your liver, what would happen, do you think, if the energetic frequencies of, let's say, Wi-Fi, or your cell phone, or your television, or your computer, those kinds of frequencies are called electromagnetic frequencies, only those ones can be harmful. They can actually interfere with the function of our body. So this is one of the things that can actually cause problems at the cellular level. Well, what else might cause issues there? This is a big one, heavy metals. See, just like our liver cell has an optimal vibratory frequency, well, so does mercury. So does lead, aluminum, arsenic, and cadmium. They all have their own thumbprint, so to speak, their own signature that's unique to them. Only those things aren't necessarily supposed to be in our body, and they can start to interact with our cells. What else? Well, this is a great picture of, these guys spraying pesticides and herbicides. By the way, this is ubiquitous. Okay, these chemicals I'm finding in people every single day. And we've all heard of Roundup. Roundup's just one of many. But these chemicals are sprayed on the crops get consumed, the chemicals get into our system, and if our body doesn't have a very good way of breaking that chemical down and getting rid of it, that chemical is going to accumulate in our body. And I'll get to what happens in a moment. How about other industrial type pollutants? Listen, we live in one of the most toxic environments that we've ever lived in, and the reason I say that is because every year hundreds of new chemicals are put on the market, and those chemicals get put into the environment, and you and I get exposed to these chemicals. We breathe them in, we rub them on our skin, we eat them through food, we drink them through whatever we're drinking. Radiation, this is another big one people don't think about so much. Radiation can come from x-rays. You go in to get your dental work done and they do x-rays. You break a bone, or you think you broke a bone, they do an x-ray. Mammograms, x-ray. Fukushima was a nuclear reactor in Japan that was breached in 2011 by a tsunami, and that radiation, that nuclear radiation, got into the water, got into the ocean, got into the atmosphere. The atmosphere rains it down on the crops. People get exposed to radiation that way. MRIs and CT scans will give off different types of radiation. How about pharmaceuticals? Okay, medications. These kinds of chemicals all have their own very specific frequency as well. The average Minnesotan is taking something like 10 to 12 medications. That's a lot of different chemicals in the body. You add to that vaccinations that have heavy metals as adjuvants in them, and other chemicals in them, preservatives, formaldehyde, things like that. And then, in addition to all the chemical and other types of toxins, we are constantly around different types of pathogenic critters like bacteria and viruses and parasites and fungus and molds, yeasts. So every bacteria has its own frequency as well. So listen, I don't want to belabor the point, but I'm trying to paint the picture for you that you and I are exposed on a daily basis to a variety of these different types of energetic frequencies. Whether we see them or not, we are exposed to them. And when they come into our system, whereas before our body was in tune, we were on the right channel, so to speak, now it's as if when we got exposed to that chemical toxin or that bacteria, it's kind of like we turned the channel. We turned the channel on our radio and we got static. In the analogy, the static is that whatever organ that particular chemical toxin or infectious agent is in will begin to change how that cell vibrates. Okay? The optimal vibratory frequency of my liver, for example, has now been altered to a frequency that's not ideal for it. This is what leads to dysfunction. When you put enough cells vibrating at the wrong frequency, you've got static on your system. And over time, that static on your system is what leads to a symptom. So by the time you have a symptom of, let's say that it's heart problems, or by the time you've got pain in your gut, or diarrhea, or constipation, or some other dysfunction in your gut, by the time you can't breathe very well, or you've got asthma or allergies, respiratory problems, by the time your brain has been deteriorating and you can't think clearly and you've got brain fog. Okay, these are just some examples, but by the time these organs are dysfunctional, you can bet that at the cellular level, something has been building itself in a state of dis-ease, lack of ease, for a period of time. Nobody wakes up and just has cancer one day. Cancer takes time as the cells build themselves abnormally. So this is the idea, the concept, really the truth behind how our bodies work at the deep energetic levels, and how they get to be dysfunctional and eventually become diseased. And then we start to hear these named diseases, and people come in my office all the time and they say, "Doc, I got diagnosed with Hashimoto's disease of my thyroid gland. I've got irritable bowel syndrome. I've got dementia, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's. I've got asthma and allergies. I've got fibromyalgia." I mean, you name it. Whatever the disease process is, I really don't care what you call it. It is a breakdown of the cells. Now, with all that said, and I want you to stay tuned for a subsequent video where I will discuss, okay, how do we find that then? If this is true, then how do we find which organ or system is actually under some kind of a stressor that's dysfunctional? And then more importantly, how do we find out what's causing that stressor? And how do we get it out of there? Because at the end of the day, nothing else matters unless you can find the root cause. And if you can't find the root cause, which is going to be a chemical or a pernicious agent like an infectious pathogen, unless you find those things, all you're going to be doing is treating symptoms. We find those things, safely remove them out of the body, and those cells start to vibrate at the right frequency. They begin to make the chemicals they should be able to make correctly, and we get to see healing. So, I really hope that makes sense, and I thank you for watching. Again, watch for a subsequent video where we'll get into more detail about, okay, how do we find it? How do we get rid of it? Thanks a lot. Have a great day.